Happy podcast day, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. How are you, wherever it is that you're watching or listening from? This is Africa Aspirations. My name is Fola Folayo. As usual, I am your host on this podcast, and I do not have the usual suspects with me this week, but I do have familiar faces. Frederick, Golooba, Mutebi is here as usual. Hi.
Hi, Fala.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
And we have a guest from Nairobi, Peter Kagwanja. Hello, Peter. Welcome.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for welcoming me.
Yeah, it's good to have you on the show. So, this week, gentlemen, we're turning our focus to the evolving relationship between Africa and China. If you recall, earlier in the year, China had pledged $51 billion in financing over the next 3 years, targeting infrastructure, targeting energy, community development projects across the continent. Now, the economic benefits of this partnership are quite evident, but there is an equally important dimension that I think that we need to explore, which is governance. China's development and governance model have been a topic of global fascination of late. So, gentlemen, what lessons do you think that Africa can draw from China's governance approach? Frederick, you just came back from China, so you've seen a lot. What were your first impressions of that country?
Yeah, thank you, Fola. Actually, before I went to China, I had long been fascinated by that country. I was already a big fan, watching it from a distance.
Okay.
And I had always wanted to go. So when the chance came for me to go, I grabbed it with both hands. I went to China, landed in Guangzhou, and I was really, really blown away. China has really transformed itself in only 45 years.
45 years?
Yeah, 45 years. And the transformation is really blinding, I can tell you that. So I had the opportunity to be taken around on the east coast of the country.
Okay.
I was in about 4 cities. And I can tell you what I saw there, and they did take us on tours of car manufacturing plants, technology parks, innovation, commercialization centers, universities, science. I mean, so many innovations. And you could see that these people are very, very focused. And being there made me understand why the Western world is nervous about China. Because just from the impressions I gained over 2 weeks, and 2 weeks is no time to really claim that you know a country, but you can only get impressions. The impressions I got suggest to me that China is probably unstoppable. The West will huff and puff, but these guys seem to know where they are going. They took us to companies. We went to this laser technology company. It is only 16 years old. And it has grown and grown, and now is one of the big exporters of laser technology to the United States, one of the big suppliers of Tesla. And they took us to these solar power manufacturing plants. And again, you can see they're roaring ahead. Then we went to a training school of the Communist Party of China.
Communist Party?
Yeah, they have a training school where we met the academics who teach there, and I discovered that actually the Chinese Communist Party is not a mass party. Not everybody can be a member. Not everybody in China is a member. To be a member, you have to apply to join. And when you apply, you go through a 3-year process of evaluation.
Probation.
So you and you apply at the grassroots, at village level. Yeah. And they give you 2 people who mentor you and follow your progress. Second year, they give you another 2 people. And then in the 3rd year is when you begin now to get temporary membership until you're confirmed as a member. And basically, they recruit some of the best brains in the country. So that's the first thing. But even if you don't really have such a good brain, or you haven't been intellectually so successful, but you have shown promise as a mobilizer, as a voluntary worker, as somebody who is interested in community mobilization, they take those in too. So it's a party that is very elitist in very many ways. But it is in recruiting those very specific people that you begin to understand why they're very successful. Now, we went to interact with Chinese think tanks and universities.
Okay.
And we had this, the last event we had was a conference. They had invited researchers and analysts and people working in think tanks and universities from 115 countries from the global south. Now, at that meeting, they brought really senior officials of the Communist Party. You could see this process of establishing links between Chinese universities and think tanks and global south.
So it's like a pipeline.
It's a pipeline.
To leadership.
It's being driven from the top. And when you see all that, and you look at their cities and you see the number of electric cars on the roads, the number of electric motorcycles, you really begin to get a measure of what China is like and where China is going and why it's making people so nervous. But also, I came away thinking that I'm going to be very careful in listening to Western media's rendering of what China is like, because now I'm becoming very suspicious about what they feed us on concerning what the country is like, what the party is like. And so I think that we Africans, we have some important lessons to learn from China. That my two takeaways is we don't have political parties. Or these groups that masquerade as political parties, for the most part, they are not serious organizations. You need to look at the CPC to understand what a serious political party is.
Interesting. I want to come back to you on that. I know that this is not the first time I'm hearing from you when you say that in Africa that, we do not have political parties. But I want to go to Peter. Peter, what's your impression? What's your take on China's approach and Africa's approach to governance and leadership?
I have managed also to move across China. Possibly out of the 39 or so provinces, I've managed to get to about 20 or something, moving around for conferences and for many things. Well, if you check my profile, you see what I do around there, particularly our website, Africa Policy Institute. Now, but for me, it's not about the traveling. It's not about how many times you go in. It is what Dr. Golooba is talking about. He's talking about what we are fed on. We are fed on Western notions of China, or what they want actually to believe. They know what they themselves believe, but they want us to believe something different. China is in its own class. As a model, it's not just a party, but a knowledge-driven party. Knowledge-driven. So you can simply say that China is a knowledge-driven country, which means that whatever they are doing, it is underpinned by knowledge, and therefore you cannot identify the way you do in the West and say these are scholars and these are the line dividing those who are governing and those who are thinking is very thin. So you're finding the professor, for example, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences is in the top leadership of the Communist Party, and many other people sit in different industries and so on. Even industries, for example, we have an MOU with the China National Petroleum Corporation, but not the company, their think tank, which is the Economic and Trade something corporation. I mean, so just a think tank within corporation, which has the capacity to produce what universities do produce within the area that they are specializing in, for example, energy. So they can do research and publish. And this is just a Chinese corporation. So that is how knowledge is important to the Chinese. Now, when you begin to see what that has done to them, from 1978, when they took what they call reform and opening up, they have basically transformed themselves into one of the largest economies. I know that they refer to the number 2 economy. I'm not sure they have not gone beyond number 2 in terms of what you see when you get on the ground. Their infrastructure, their airports, their connectivity and everything, their high-rises, their cities. They are the only people who are able to earmark and spend space of about 200 or 300 kilometers and decide that this is where we are going to have the city and not the old city, like they've done in quite a number of other areas. So in short, they've also been able to eliminate abject poverty, what you can call absolute poverty, meaning that even during the COVID-19, the issue of people sleeping hungry or something, they have such a mechanism of doing that through the party. It's estimated 850 million people have been lifted out of poverty in the last 40 years, which is the largest group of in human history, and has a huge in terms of producing the middle class in China, which now is driving the consumption. It is driving the tourists that you are seeing in Africa, because we have just middle class of 500 million people within a space of about 15 years.
Peter, I'm sorry I'm interrupting you, but I would like us to, to still center around what we're talking about, because what I can hear from you, what I can hear from Frederick is the leadership selection process. You've talked about the academy, and he's just talked about, the Academy of Social Sciences, and how that it's a pipeline from the academy to think tanks and then to leadership. Why is that not possible in Africa? Why don't we have, our leaders? Why don't we have it from that's in pipeline to our leadership? Is it something we can learn and put into practice? Can it work? And if it can work, how will it work?
I really don't see I don't see how we can make that work within the context of this so-called competitive multi-party politics. Because you see in China, even if the CPC is not the only political party in China, by the way, there are other parties, but those parties work with the CPC. They're almost unheard of, but they work with the CPC. But the CPC is the motto that drives everything. Now, if you have a context where you have, say, 5, 6, 10 political parties fighting for power, obsessed with who must win to be
and the winner takes all.
And the winner takes all. And once one group wins, the others are fighting to get this one out of power so that they can come in. Where do you get the space? Where do you get the inspiration to actually think of building a system like China's, where academic institutions, where think tanks, where the private sector are all working with the political leadership
to achieve a common goal,
to drive the country towards the destination that they all think is where the country should go? So what has happened to us is we have been influenced through the education we get, through our interaction with Westerners, through going to Western universities and studying there, that actually the best thing that we need is multi-party politics, because then that is democracy. But actually multi-party politics, the way we practice it, has been so debilitating of any potential we may have to work together to drive our countries towards, in the direction that is going to be beneficial to everybody. Now, the Chinese who don't belong to the Chinese Communist Party, whether they belong or not, they're all benefiting from what the party is doing. So I think that in Africa, what we need to do is to think again in terms of how we need to organize and structure our politics in such a way that we can have long periods of continuity, both in terms of thinking, in terms of policy making, both in terms of implementation. There are things, there are policies that you can't implement in 5 years. You have to be pushing at these things for many, many, many years before you can get them right. I mean, look, China is manufacturing cars. It's manufacturing planes, fighter jets and all that. I can't see how they would have been able to do that in a context of...
If every 4 years they keep changing
Every
systems.
4 years they change leadership.
Yeah.
They may get good leaders these 4 years, and the next 4 years they get criminals who are just filling their pockets. So it's not possible for us to actually get anywhere while continuing this nonsense of, competitive multipartyism where every small group is forming their own little group and calling it a political party, but it's not really a political party. It's a special purpose vehicle for getting certain individuals into power so that they can use power whichever way they want.
Curiously, African leaders travel. I mean, just like you have taken a trip. Yeah. You went on a tour, you saw all of these things. African leaders do the same. They go, they have meetings, they have agreements, conversations. Why has any one of them decided, okay, what I'm seeing here is clearly a structure and a system that is working? Why can't we emulate that? Peter?
I think one of the things that we have done, which is not right, is to emphasize on democracy rather than what democracy is supposed to deliver. Democracy is supposed not just to bring fair play in society, but it's also supposed to bring stability. But unfortunately, sad to say, democracy has been one of the most destabilizing forces in our society, particularly the African society, and has much to do with the thinking, the philosophy that underpins, the democracy itself. If you compare it, for example, with what underpinned our society before, what underpins China today. In China, it is not about democracy, it's about merit. It's about, you cannot get to a position of whatever nature if you don't merit it. Or just because you are associated with so-and-so, you are a relative of so-and-so, or you went to school with so-and-so. That's not enough. You've got to prove it yourself. Now, there's a debate that is really widely quoted, which I think, it fascinates me, between the Americans and the Chinese. And this was just after George W. Bush had come to power.
Okay.
And this Chinese, Chang Weiwei, was telling the Americans, I can predict that they're going to come a leader who is worse off than, George W. Bush. And when he was saying that, he was simply saying that there are no standards. It's not about the merit. It's perhaps about the money you have or the connections you have. It's not about what you are worth yourself. And then, so when it comes to China, I traveled to one of the villages where the current president, Xi Jinping, worked as a young man, a young secretary of the party. You are supposed to work outside your province for 10 years in a different area, and you have a proven,
a track record. Yeah.
A track record that you did well. Two, you need, after beyond the 10 years of that training, you also need to, you are serving outside your area, so you cannot breed what you call localism or this, so there's a national notion to this. And then you have to govern. If you have to get to the top, the 7 people in what they call the Politburo, you have to have governed 110 million people in Chinese standard. 110 million people for 10 years. Meaning by the time you get to the top, anybody who gets to the top will govern China well. So you don't have one person who you say, if this one goes, you are not sure how this country is going to go. Yeah. Anybody who reaches Politburo is capable of governing.
Peter, do you think that approach would have worked, for instance, in the selection process in Kenya, looking at the recent example of what had happened with the deputy president's situation, do you think this approach would have worked in Kenya?
No, it should have worked if this is what we are working towards. You cannot shoot a bird that you did not aim at. I think this is where it is not part of our agenda. For example, Mzee Moi, the dictator of our time, we keep on referring to him, had this intention to perpetuate his party, not himself, to perpetuate his party for 100 years. And he made that pronouncement in public in one of our stadiums and said, my party is going to rule this country for 100 years. And we all laughed at him. He gathered all the young leaders and put them at Kasarani Stadium and selected a core of them. And those are the people who have governed us up to now, including William Ruto. Even next year, when we have another election, the competition is going to be between those that we choose. The only thing they have done is to swap parties. Some have their own personal parties. Right now, Odinga has ODM, Kalonzo Musyoka has another one. And now, when we come to the DP, the problem the DP had was he didn't have a party because he came with the president's party. If I had the party, the president would have hesitated kicking him out because he would have moved out with his members. But now he was vulnerable. Those people who had parties, even when there were small parties like the Speaker of the National Assembly, whose party has only one county out of 47, he's still the Speaker. So here we have a situation where parties are not the kind of CCP party, Communist Party of China, the way we know it. They are personal property. They are kind of extensions of personal estates. And that means that if you get into somebody's party, you have become part and parcel of that estate.
So what you're saying is that these parties are driven by personalities instead of a national agenda or nationalist agenda.
Yes, there is no national agenda in these parties. There is only personal agenda in terms of gaining and retaining power in perpetuity. Now, if you're defeated, you somehow come in something called coalition. And in this coalition, you share power, state power. So this is how Raila Odinga has survived. And like now, kicking Gachagua out, he gets the dividends of 4 cabinet ministers in his government. So we have this kind of an opposition, or rather kind of a government in Kenya, which is a very interesting mongrel. You don't know whether it's white or black. You don't know its genetic makeup or where it comes from, because the leader of opposition is also a partner in the broad-based government, and the government is supporting him to be the African Union, and his members who the other day were condemning Adani and the corruption which is taking place are now the greatest defender and the roundest defender of Adani. So you look at this mouth and the same mouth about a year ago, and you cannot tell where they stand. They are not zombies. It's very big.
How does this apply to the Ugandan situation, Frederick?
It's pretty much the same thing. We have this so-called party, the National Resistance Movement, which came to power 37 years ago, raised the hopes of Ugandans by declaring Uganda no party state, suspended multi-party politics, brought its potential adversaries into government.
That sounded like something you would approve of.
In the name of creating consensus and therefore working together to take the country in a particular direction. 37 years on, we no longer recognize the NRM that we saw 37 years ago. The NRM now has become an arena of horse trading. Politicians being paid off to defect from one party into the NRM, politicians within the NRM being paid off to do certain things, politicians within that organization being accused of stealing colossal sums of money to do things in their own constituencies. Now, this party, you cannot really depend on it to take Uganda in or to transform Uganda in the way the CPC has transformed China. The NRM in Uganda is a party to which anyone can belong. You just need to wear a yellow T-shirt or praise the president, and you declare yourself a member. Members of the party declare themselves to be candidates for this seat or that seat.
So how are candidates selected?
Lack of discipline, lack of focus, lack of any kind of concerted effort to think collectively about where to take the country. So now it's about themselves, not the country. And so for me, being in China and talking to people about the CPC and realizing what the CPC is really about made me think we delude ourselves in thinking that we have political parties that are interested in transforming our countries and in changing our lives. These are not political organizations that we should be taking seriously. But we need to come to a point where we get away from this business of competitive politics, one party winning and defeating others and monopolizing power. I don't know how we are going to do it.
Practically, how do we do that?
I think we, the intellectual elite, have been brainwashed into thinking that political competition is the answer to everything. That if you have a government and a so-called strong opposition, then you've really arrived. Then you have democracy, and therefore it's a good thing, regardless of where those arrangements are taking the country, regardless of the impact, negative or positive, that they might be having on the ordinary person. We just celebrate governments and strong opposition. Multi-party politics, there is competition. Elections come and we fight and beat each other up and exchange money and goods, and we are happy. And we say, we are such a wonderful democracy. I have usually been laughing at Ghanaians and Kenyans and how they boast about their democracy. And you go there and you travel around the country and you say, well, how different are you from where I'm coming from? Because we don't have the kind of democracy that is praised by Western media.
I think
but
that
people
when
live lives just as pathetic as yours.
I think that when Western media praises democracy, what they praise is, when they see what they call the strong opposition, people protesting, people, saying anything that they can say, and then they're called, because there's those kind of dissenting voices and they're allowed to thrive. So it's called a democracy.
Yeah, but in substance, what has those model democracies achieved that dictatorships haven't achieved? We all live the same pathetic lives.
We all still poor.
Have the same
there's still corruption
weak
everywhere.
Institutions. We all suffer the same abuse by governments with very few exceptions. So we need to think again. I don't know how it's going to happen. I see the makings of it here in Rwanda, and I was describing to you the other day. Few people know that actually there are many political parties in Rwanda, and that when we don't see them fighting, when we don't hear of a strong opposition in Rwanda, it's not because there are no parties. It's not because of dictatorship, but it's because there are the makings of a national consensus around how to organize the country in order to push it forward. And everybody agrees that it is a good thing for them to work together to try and take this country from A to B collectively. Now, a lot of people stand outside Rwanda and say, oh, look, dictatorship, what have you.
But that's the solution right there.
The complexity of the system here and how it works and how very beneficial it has been for this country.
You just answered your own question. When you said you don't know how, this is how, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know how the Rwandans arrived at it. I don't know what drove it, but I really am not optimistic that elsewhere we can replicate this easily.
Peter, what do you think? Do you think it can be replicated easily? For instance, in Kenya.
It is possible. It's basically discarding some of the thinking that we think are very much in vogue. And I agree with what Frederick is saying, that in Kenya, in South Africa, in Ghana, and others, the so-called democratic order, what we have is a one-day democracy. That I can tell you what it was, one-day democracy, which means the voting day. And we spend a lot of time preparing for the voting day, and a lot of time away from the voting day, which is more of mismanagement, dictatorship, and chaos. That's why you see the disenchantment in Kenya as you see today, because we concentrate on that day. Now, what China does differently and what seems to be emerging in Rwanda is basically that it's everyday democracy. And everyday democracy means that you are pursuing the issues that you agreed on. And everybody, industry, politician, academics, is on a common agenda. You're not having so many agendas, somebody waking up in the morning from their kitchen and thinking that the best thing that has happened in the world is this. And then they start pushing it, and they get some little money from the West or from some other source, and they start pushing that agenda. And before you say Jack, they have won, what we call Nobel Peace Prize for that. Then you wonder, how does what they have won a Nobel Peace Prize for relate to the core national agenda of that country? Nothing. So we are vetted for things that are not ours. We are rewarded and made heroes for things that don't work for us. That is different from China. Their democracy, of course, is ridiculed by the West as democratic centralism, meaning that it is the Stalinist kind of thing. But this is not true. What you do is a bottom up. They just collect the people, and Frederick has talked about at the bottom. The bottom is not ignorant. The grassroots in China are actually the builders of the party. So they say, our priority in this province is this. Our priority in this village is this. Then all those are collected and discussed. Then they're subjected to the academics, the intellectuals, the policy thinkers. And then they're shifted to a couple of things. So their parliament does not meet every day. It meets as a certain period in the year to consider all what has come from the grassroots and come up with an agenda that governs the whole year. And then it is turned into law. So they have a system, one, that has merit, that you cannot be where you are if you don't merit it, and you have to. And if you don't achieve that, there are two. The meriting is not just the skill; it is also your value base. In other words, if you are corrupt, you'll not be told to go; you'll go yourself.
Now, just talking about values, one of the things I noticed in China, and which really struck me, we went to this city called Dongguan.
Okay.
Now, in Dongguan is located one of the leading universities of China, Tsinghua.
Yeah.
Now, at Tsinghua University, they have something they call the Innovation Commercialization Center. It's a new center.
Okay.
It's been built very recently. And this is where there are young scientists who are inventing things, go and test their ideas for mass production. And we found this guy who is producing robots, robots of different kinds, and he's building robots, and he's being helped to try and commercialize these things. Now, guess who built this center? Who funded the construction of this center? The municipal authorities. Now, we left there and we went to another location where they've just built a new university. This is the mainland campus of Hong Kong City University.
Yeah.
So they have built a new campus on the mainland. Massive buildings, and they've just completed phase 1. And again, we asked them who is building this. And again, it's the municipal authorities.
That's like a local government.
Yes, yes. And the lady who came to brief us about this said that this idea came from the mayor, because the mayor had just been transferred to Dongguan from Shanghai. Yeah. And he had achieved a lot of things in Shanghai. So he comes to Dongguan, and these things are not there. And he says, no, I must replicate the stuff that I did in Shanghai, because he was considered to have been very successful running Shanghai. So he comes here and begins to inject money in these things. Now, you see that this mayor is not motivated to buy farms for himself or be a rich person. No, he's actually doing things that take not only the city of Dongguan ahead,
But
but
the
are going to
entire
take
country.
the entire country ahead.
And what he's doing is he's investing in the future
Yes.
of that country.
And I looked at these things and thought some African governments are incapable of doing stuff like that. This is being done by a municipal government. You go to these regional cities, and you look at regional airports. We have nothing similar in Africa. I mean, the airports, it's incredible. You leave China thinking, where are we Africans going? Why are we incapable of doing stuff like this?
Is it a question of capacity or willingness?
I think the answer to your question is both. The political will is very, very important.
Yeah.
In China, after 1949, when the ruling party came to power, the leader of the time concentrated on building a kind of leadership that think about the country, and they invested a lot in education. They invested a lot in building that consciousness about China. Now, the successor, Deng Xiaoping, concentrated on moving the country from socialism per se to the market, without at the same time losing the values that brought their country to power.
Yeah.
And therefore, it concentrated now on building capacity and defending China on how it is going to get into the market without being corrupted by the ways of capitalist market, which tend towards individualism. So you maintain that collective and patriotic view of your country. At the same time, you want to get into the world. And I think the greatest thing that China is putting onto the table for thinkers and for political practitioners is the idea of merging market with socialism. And in an African setting, it's our collectivism, where how we have families, we have our villagers, and people we associate with very strongly. So you don't have to separate the two. You can, but then you create a certain capacity whereby you are able to accumulate, but for the purpose, for the benefit of the community, rather than for your own self-aggrandizement. The problem we have in Africa is this idea that you get rich, you get money, and put it offshore. People leak the information that you are the richest guy in the world, and people, everybody start learning behind you and for you and admiring you. It's basically you become a trophy, and the trophy mentality is what is basically destroying the continent. Finally, there is something that must be said. In Africa, we're emphasizing the wrong things. I think for Africa, what we need is continuity in stability. What has transformed Rwanda is not necessarily the quality of government or governance. It is the continuity of leadership and with consistent policies that get to a certain direction. What has made China what it is are 45 years of peace, no war, no known war that China has been involved with in that big way. Within that period, America has fought war in Iran, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and in Syria. It has been to Libya. It has been to Sudan. You can go to Latin America, Venezuela, and so on. It has fought wars in almost all the continents. Now it is in Ukraine, and so on. But China is not in this. So peace has its part, but not just peace. Stability is what
consistent leadership, consistent stability.
Consistent stability. That's the only way we can realize the development, the way China has realized its development.
All right, final word, Frederick. Do you agree?
I agree entirely. But just to nuance a bit what Peter said, clearly continuity of leadership in Rwanda has been very important.
Yeah.
But that has roots in something. It has roots in the RPF as a political organization. Because the RPF runs this country alongside the president. And the RPF is a party that is guided by certain values. The RPF is very hard on its members on matters of discipline following the values of the party. And I think that that's the same thing that one could say for the CPC.
Okay.
I think that in the CPC, as a leader, you succeed based on your achievements for the community that you lead.
Yeah, yeah.
And Peter did mention President Xi Jinping and the areas where he was as a young man. I actually have a book of his speeches when he was leading this little place in China called Ningde, and the speeches that he was making at various gatherings and the things that he was emphasizing. And you could see he was so intent on building and developing this very marginalized part of China and transforming it. And that is what propelled him to leadership at higher levels.
Yeah.
The success he achieved as a leader at lower levels. Now, how do people become leaders in other places?
They buy their way in.
Praises of the leaders, by buying their way in there, by being political barons representing certain ethnic groups. It's so shallow that leaders are not driven by the desire to achieve for their communities. They are driven by completely other things. And I think that until we reach a point where we actually see this as important, we are going to continue to wallow in poverty, wallow in all these wars that we have, the instabilities promoted by so-called democracy. Every time, in many countries, every time there's going to be an election, there is tension. Look at Mozambique.
Yeah.
Why is it that Mozambique and other African countries cannot have elections that are peaceful, that happen one day and the next day they go back to work? What is it they're fighting over? And then that ends, and you'll hear people telling you, Mozambique is such a great democracy because there is competition and they have a powerful opposition.
Powerful opposition to what end?
These are people who have been to school, who are university graduates.
Yeah.
And all you hear them talking, the most important thing to them in a country is a powerful opposition and competition. And you think, guys, do you actually, are you
do you hear
incapable of
yourself?
looking beyond these kind of cosmetic things? No, they don't. We have been conditioned to think about ourselves and to think about our communities and our societies and how to take them forward really the wrong way. We really need to re-examine many of our beliefs about these things.
Absolutely. And we do need to re-examine our beliefs. And on that note, this is a conversation I feel like we'll still have over and over again.
We should.
On this podcast.
I wish it was going on in our universities.
Yes. Thank you, gentlemen, for being part of this conversation today. Thank you very much, Peter, for joining us. Hope we have you again on Africa Aspirations. And definitely...
Thank you, Peter. Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you, Frederick, for coming around.
My pleasure.
Gentlemen and ladies, boys and girls, it's been Africa Aspirations. See you again next week. Goodbye.